Well, good morning, everybody, and thank you for joining us today for this BSI ISO conference on current and future challenges in OH&S management and how standards can help. This morning, we are going to be looking at why managing health and safety is essential for small businesses and the service sector. Before we begin, I'm going to run through a little bit of housekeeping. This is a listen-only webinar that is being recorded. We do welcome your questions, though, throughout the webinar via the question and answer function, and we'll answer live questions throughout. So please don't wait till the end to post your question. We'll answer them as much as we can as we're talking, and any we don't answer, we'll answer afterwards and send you a written response. Do let us know if you're having any technical difficulties and our team will help you. So any audio problems, for example, just let us know. This is CPD recognised. Please request your certificate via the feedback survey, and the slides and access to the recording will be made available to you when you finish our feedback survey after the event. So please don't worry about reading everything on a slide. There's a lot of information there and we won't read it all, but you'll be able to read it yourself later. So let us move on, and let me introduce you to myself and to our distinguished panel today. Panelists, if you'd like to turn on your cameras now so everybody can see you, that would be great. My name is Sally Swinwood. I am a lead standards development manager for BSI, the UK national standards body, and I also manage the ISO technical committee for occupational health and safety management. Now, Francois, would you like to introduce yourself?
Morning for you, good evening for me in New Zealand. Francois Barton, I'm the Executive Director of the Business Leaders Health and Safety Forum. We're a not-for-profit leadership group here in New Zealand with 400 chief executive members. And my job is to really help support them to build the cultures that let their people and their business thrive. And we've been working in the last 3 years in particular around mentally healthy work. So it's a real pleasure to be here today.
Thanks so much for joining us, Francois. John, also in New Zealand.
Tēnā koutou katoa. My name is Dr. John Fitzgerald. I'm a clinical psychologist by training. 35 years practicing and as an academic in clinical psychology. But currently I am manager for the mentally healthy work team at WorkSafe New Zealand. WorkSafe New Zealand is New Zealand's primary health and safety at work regulator. And the mentally healthy work team, which is one of the teams that deals with psychosocial factors at work, has been in place for a couple of years. So we're still building up our portfolio of work, but a hugely challenging and interesting area of activity.
Great to have you with us, John. Thank you. Barbara, please.
Good morning from Austria. Good afternoon to New Zealand and Australia. My name is Barbara Libowicki. I am head of Alpha Sicher, which is a service for micro and small enterprises in Austria, which we can offer free of charge, helping these enterprises up to 50 employees to improve their occupational safety and health performance. Alpha, which is my employer, we're part of the Austrian social security system and part of ESA, of course. So I have been with the ISO TC 283 from the very beginning, and I'm very happy to represent the micro and small enterprises here in the committee. Thank you.
Thanks, Barbara, and thanks for being here. Ruth, would you like to introduce yourself?
Morning, Sally. Morning, all, to everybody listening and to all the other panellists. Ruth Wilkinson here, the head of health and safety. I work at the Institution of Occupational Safety and Health, so IOSH, as you've probably heard of us. We are the chartered body for occupational safety and health professionals. Obviously, our headquarters is in the UK, so hi to everybody in the UK and around the globe listening. We have approximately 47,000 members across 130 countries. Obviously, we've got campaigns running, training offering, all with a vision of a safer and healthier world of work. And obviously we also sit on ISO TC 283. So thank you ever so much for inviting us here to this panel today. Thanks, Sally.
Thanks for coming here, Ruth. I know we've had some clashes with other events, so we appreciate you making some adjustments to your schedule. Linda, please introduce yourself.
Okay, good day, everyone. My name is Linda Iskandar. Now I'm currently working as Administration Director for ISO Expert Association, and I'm also Indonesian representative for TC 283 from the 2020, and I also working as an OH&S management system auditor based on our regulation in Indonesia, and based on ISO 45001, also environmental management system and food safety management system. Thank you, Sally.
Thanks very much, Linda. And a little reminder to our panelists, we're already talking in jargon. So for anybody who doesn't know, ISO TC 283 is the international committee that looks at occupational health and safety management and has developed standards such as ISO 45001 that Linda just mentioned, which is the first global standard on occupational health and safety management systems. But perhaps what we will be looking at a little bit more today is ISO 45003, which is psychological health and safety at work and managing psychosocial risk. So please, if any of us, including me, starts to talk in acronyms or jargon you do not understand, put something in the chat and I will stop us and explain. It's very easily done, and I do apologise in advance. Okay, let's make a start. I'm going to come to you, Ruth. This session is largely focusing on small businesses and the service sector, perhaps less traditional areas in terms of occupational health and safety management. Can you tell us why health and safety should always be a priority?
I mean, yeah, of course. Thanks, Sally. I think just to kick start, it'd just be worth reminding us all of the ILO, so the International Labour Organization statistics around the impact of poor occupational safety and health globally. So that the estimates still tell us that there are 2.78 million workers that die each year from occupational accidents and work-related diseases, with 2.4 million of those related to the latter, the occupational diseases. So that's 7,500 people who are dying from unsafe, unhealthy working conditions every day. So obviously it's about the protection of people from harm. So a protection against safety and health hazards, which is relevant here as we're talking about the psychological safety, those psychosocial risks. It's those multitude of factors that go on in the workplace, the hazards, the risks, what can cause harm to people. So the statistics are still stark, you know, they're high. People are going to work, they're not going home, being made injured. So there are other priorities that we need to do. We need to look at the value of people. We need to protect them, but actually people in the workplace, they also bring a value. So that value being the skill set that they bring, the experience, the knowledge, the ideas, the innovation. And we've seen this through COVID, haven't we, that we had a pandemic, which is a public health crisis coming into our workplaces. And how do we make those workplaces safe, and how do we look after the people to continue to work? So it is about looking after people, and the benefits of doing that obviously go back to those individuals. Yes, we want to reduce accidents and illness. Of course we do, you know, we've just seen those statistics, but actually by giving those benefits to people, it goes back to benefits to the business, benefits to society. So there's a complete holistic picture here of, you know, there's the fundamentals of why we do this to protect people, but there are also some business benefits to doing it as well, keeping businesses running, supply chains. We saw impacts on supply chains through COVID as well in relation to the people doing those roles. So it really is, and obviously there's an expectation now through customers, the workers themselves, other stakeholders. They want to see that businesses are acting socially responsible. They are responsible businesses. And again, one of the ways of doing that is demonstrating that you are looking after your people, so looking after their health, their safety, and their well-being. And I suppose just to mention that at IOSH we are very much looking at the role of occupational safety and health within sustainability, because it is about people as well as the planet and the profit. So I hope that's helped summarise some of the points that are on that slide there, Sally, so that there's a vast amount of reasons that we do this. Fundamentally protecting people, but the value of looking after people can be far and wide, to its individual through the workplace. You know, people who are safe, healthy and well are more likely to be more engaged, loyal, productive, motivated in that workplace. And so hopefully we've seen in recent times through COVID that by looking after people, supporting them to work, come to work in that safe and healthy way, can also bring back those business benefits, as also reassuring them that their own health and safety is valued by that employer. So yeah, they're my thoughts on that point. Thank you, Sally.
Thanks, Ruth. And we'll come on a little bit later on about why it's so important, particularly for small businesses and the service sector, these businesses that perhaps don't have traditional occupational health and safety hazards that are so apparent, and people don't focus in the same way, but it doesn't mean it's less important. I'm going to come to you now, Linda. I'd like to ask you how standards can help businesses manage this important area of work. Can you say a little bit about that, please? If we could have the next slide, David.
Okay, thank you, Sally. Although in our country, in Indonesia, we have regulation that obligate to company or organization that have employee more than 100 people or less than 100 with a major hazard to implement OH&S management system based on our regulation. And especially with the company, yeah, they have to carry out the certification audit. Yeah. And after the ISO 45001 release in 2018, yeah, many organizations in our country want to integrate the OH&S management system, what they have with our based on our regulation, with ISO 45001. Why many organizations in our country want to set up or develop ISO 45000? Whether they have our government OH&S management system, because this is the benefit of ISO 45000 in our mind. First of all, is our clients feels ISO 45000 have clause about the organization context that require to determine to external and internal interested party, also relevant to organizational objective, not only the government regulation. Yeah, so this is the one point that when we set up the planning about OH&S management system is based the first is based on the context organization. And the other important clauses in ISO 45000 is there are clauses about improvement. In our regulation, Sally and our panelists, there are no clauses about improvement, just all that about the how to comply the obligation of our government. But what if we have comply? There is no guarantee, there is no guidance, yeah. So in 45,000, many our clients feel that this clause is very important, yeah, because after we comply with our government, yeah, we also have input how to maintain the OH&S management system to become beyond, to become OH&S culture, yeah, something like that. Thank you, Sally.
Thank you, Linda. So, yeah, absolutely. I think it's important to remember that legislation varies a great deal around the world. So what we do with standards is collectively gather what we agree to be good practice and put into the standard to guide people regardless of what the legislation in their country is, but to help them put in something in place and operate in a way that experts across the world have agreed is a good way to manage risk and to, as you say, Linda, to gradually improve, to keep improving, not just do the minimum. So I think that's a really good point that you made. Thank you, Linda. So let's move on to our topic for the day about why would a small organisation bother to use a standard like ISO 45001, which is the Occupational Health and Safety Management System standard. Small businesses, they're focusing on doing whatever it is they do. They tend to not be occupational health and safety specialists. They tend to be incredibly busy and trying to be the HR person, as well as the health and safety person, as well as the facilities manager and the media manager. Very few people doing many different jobs. So Barbara, why would you say a small organisation should use standards?
Oh, thank you, Sally. I brought two examples. One was a very small company with 7 employees. Well, there was the boss, the mother of the boss, and 5 employees, or 5 workers, and they were taking care of air conditions. So this company wanted to become a contractor of a bigger chemical plant in Austria, and they asked me to help them. And I showed them a management system approach, and they said, well, we don't need that. But the chemical plant said, you need a management system in order to work for us. This was one of the reasons. At the end, we worked for about we worked together for about half a year. And after that half year, the new boss, the manager, he said to me, you know, at first I didn't want to make all that ISO stuff. But then in the end, now I know myself how my business runs and what I can do to help my workers improve their working lives, and where I can ask for things with the contractors that we work with. So that's one of the examples that was, in my view, really successful. And the other was a company, an electric plant in a smaller part of Austria, about 50 employees. They used to be very big, and they used to have a very well-developed system of communication and everything. And then they were downsized to 50 employees. And the boss of that company also called me and said, I want to have a real good structure in order to have a sustainable structure, and so that everyone knows where to turn to in case of an incident or in case of any question he or she has in concerning occupational safety and health. So small enterprises often work from their stomachs, as we say in Austria, like very intuitive. And with a management system, you start to structure your work, you start to structure your business, you structure whatever there is to be structured, and you're always part of a supply chain as a small and medium-sized enterprise, even as a restaurant. And in restaurants, you mentioned that earlier, Sally. In restaurants, we usually don't think about hazards and risks, but there are so many. And just thinking about the chemical hazards or heat in the kitchen. So there are so many things we can think of for occupational safety and health. Yeah, so one is I want to ensure that my workers know where to turn to, and the other is I structure my own business. Thank you.
Thank you, Barbara. If I can turn to you, Francois, I'm aware that small organisations have disproportionately high bad outcomes with occupational health and safety. Can standards help with that? Why would you say a small organisation should bother?
It's a really good question about like, why would a small business rather than just any business do it? And I think, you know, John and I were talking yesterday, and the question of what does small look like will shift from Europe to the US to Great Britain and in New Zealand. So small in New Zealand means micro probably everywhere else. Like, we're talking less than 5 or fewer people. And so your description of a few people doing everything is really rings true. So I think it's a really good question to be really clear about why would we want to use, or what benefit would a small business get from using a standard. And I think context is everything. Linda talked about context, Barbara talked about context. If you're in an export market where you have requirements to get your product or your service accepted, if you are in a supply chain with high quality expectations or high ethical responsibilities or expectations, those are environments where the use of an ISO standard provides a next level of assurance. So there's a really clear market benefit. But equally, I'm trying to think, yeah, gut instinct, Barbara, that idea of trusting your stomach. I really like that idea of a small business finding a cultural value from within. I can think of a shearing business. We're in New Zealand. We're obviously famous for our agriculture and farming. I know a small shearing business that decided to use ISO. I think they're the only shearing business in the world. So they take the wool off the backs of sheep. And what they did that I thought was interesting was they didn't follow the process like slaves. They really stepped back and thought, how do we make this work for us? How do we use this as an excuse to understand our business? And they had workers that had stopped school at 13, 14, 15. So literacy to read and write was a problem. So they used quite different methods of pictures and images to be able to help get their work methods in alignment with the standard. And so for me, what I love about that story, and Barbara, your example, was the standard was kind of like a roadmap, but the process let people learn a lot about their business. And I think in health and safety and well-being, we often focus on the regulatory requirement, what the law says. And we treat that as the goal, and it's not enough. And you end up manage the standard. No, we need to manage the performance. And I often, it's not an original idea, but a fool with a tool is still a fool. I think the goal is, how do we not be fools? And I think ISO provides a process that lets us be smarter, and then gives us a structure around that. So I think the overall objective is a small business can become less of a fool. They can become smarter and cleverer about understanding their business. So that would be my view, Sally.
That's a great example. I love the example of the shearing business, and really thinking about their own context, the fact that they have low literacy with their workers. So how do we communicate most effectively? It's absolutely key, isn't it, to making standards work?
And I think what these things can do is they can create a space for people to have the courage to know what that looks like for them. I think safety, and if we've got people on the call that are new to this, there's not one way to do this. There's thousands of ways to do this. And what a standard provides you is the key ingredients, the components that you need to make present. But what that looks like in your business, that's your people, that's your stomach, Barbara, coming back to your idea. And so I think if we can view a standard as a tool that lets us fix something really important, then it's really in service of something that's going to take us somewhere better.
Absolutely, absolutely. And Barbara's already mentioned a restaurant. I'd like to come to you, John, and talk a little bit more about the service industry, non-traditional hazards. It's not always obvious to people that they need an occupational health and safety management system. What do you think the benefits for those people of using one of these roadmaps, as Francois has put it, can be?
It's been interesting coming into the national regulator, who is at the very early stages of regulating health and, well, not health and safety, but particularly health, and particularly mental health and psychosocial factors at work. That early on, we're reading 3 questions when we talk about, we refer to it as work or managing psychosocial risks. People, the first thing they say is, what is that? And so we have to explain to them what we mean, what psychosocial means, and what mentally healthy work is. The second question they often ask is, why should I care? Well, you should care because actually legislation says you have to protect your workers. Also, as already been said by Ruth, it makes good business sense that engaged and healthy workers are more productive. But also I think there's this sort of moral or ethical imperative, is why would you engage in any activity where you're knowingly putting other people at risk and hurting them? So that's why. And then the third question we get is, okay, well, I now know what it is and why I should do it. The question is, how do I do it? And that is a incredibly difficult question. Francois has already alluded to one of the things that makes it complicated is that every business is different. Every business employs different individual workers with different needs and different contextual environments that they're living in, which means that all businesses are unique. And so there is no one size fits all here. So what we need is some sort of template or guide that helps businesses to think about what psychological safety, what psychosocial risks they face, what mitigations are most appropriate for them. And so why should they use ISO 45003? Why should they use a standard? Why should they use, as we're going to move on to talk about 45001 or 45003, is because it gives them a way of starting the work. It's a bit like, I suppose, it's a bit like somebody being asked to lift not necessarily a heavy box, but a big box that actually it's very difficult to get hold of. And the standards are a bit like somebody coming along with a crowbar or something and putting it under the box and just lifting it a little bit so you can get your fingers underneath the box and you can just start to lift it yourself. But sometimes you just need that little bit of help to start to lift the box. Very difficult to do on your own, especially when it's an awkward shape. Now, why should a small business do this? I was thinking that that if you think about a large business, quite often the business units within that are working almost like as small businesses. They have specialist roles or specialist responsibilities, but they're working as small teams or a small business unit, but they're all doing similar sort of work. And so they have each other for support and they have the backup of the big business if things get difficult. Whereas with a small business, what you have is a where often everybody in that business will be doing a specialist role as well as a generalist role. Now, doing a specialist role means that there's a risk that people might become isolated. And so small businesses need to work to identify what the risks are that are faced by their specialists and generalists to really start to lift the box, to get hold of the box here. Now, we know that focusing on health, including mental health and well-being, has a number of benefits for business. Now, I've jotted a few of these down, so I'll just work through them really quickly. So improved worker well-being. Businesses that focus on well-being generally have improved worker well-being. So it's encouraging workers to look after themselves, that workers have reduced exposure to health risks generally, and associated with that, there's reduced healthcare costs to support the work. There's improved productivity, decreased absenteeism and presenteeism, improved recruitment and retention, and positive worker morale. So those all come from having a positive focus on well-being. The opposite is also true, that if a business doesn't focus on the well-being of its workers, then it's likely to suffer negatively in all of those areas. when you've got a small business and you've only got small capacity to deal with when people go down, when people get injured, when people get sick, not focusing on these things actually may be the end of your business. It may be that an event is enough so far off track that actually makes it very difficult to maintain the business. So you're much more vulnerable as a small business. Getting a handle on the risks and putting mitigations in place early may be the difference between your business failing and your business succeeding. We know that good mental health and well-being is good for business. That's already been stated. We know that good mental health and well-being at work is good for workers. And we know from the spillover effect, research on the spillover effect, that actually good work and good engagement at work is good for a worker's family and is good for the whole community. So why should small businesses use health and safety systems? It's to look after their business, to look after their workers, and to make a positive contribution to the whole of the community.
Thank you, John. That's great. David, can we move on to the next slide, please? Thank you. Just underlining some of the points that John has already made. Francois, can I bring us back slightly to this service sector, the non-traditional hazards? It's an area where actually there may well be more psychosocial risk in these organisations. Is that right? Can you tell us something about how you can introduce this into this sector, into the service sector?
Look, I've been working in health and safety for 15 plus years, and the introduction of well-being and mentally healthy work and psychological health is sort of, in my situation, probably popped into my agenda, on my radar, about probably 3, 4, 5, maybe 4 or 5 years ago. And at first it was really confronting, it was challenging, I didn't quite understand it. I am now of the opinion that mentally healthy work and well-being is the best thing that's ever happened to workplace health and safety. When I think of workplace health, when I tell my friends at a barbecue or a party that I work in health and safety, I'm not always the most popular guy. There is often an image in people's mind when we talk about health and safety that it's rules and it's constraints and it's hard hats and it's wearing bright yellow clothing. And I think if we think about service businesses, they don't have some of those traditional risks. And so health and safety feels like someone else's problem. It feels like they're being forced to think about something that isn't actually that important for them. But the beauty of mental well-being is that it's universal. Every person on earth has mental well-being. Sometimes it's good, sometimes it's bad. Work is one of the things, along with everything else in our life, that can make it either better or worse. So if we can start to bring mentally healthy work and well-being and psychological health into the conversation, it lets us talk to our people. It lets us look at our organization in a way where this is relevant, in a way that often maybe height safety or some of these issues might feel less relevant or less specific to the organization. So I think psychological health and well-being let you talk to everybody in your workplace wherever you are. The president, the prime minister, the floor cleaner, the person clearing the tables, they all have mental well-being. And if we want to have a conversation about care and protection of that well-being, it lets us start to engage a far richer conversation. And I just keep coming back to Barbara's piece around being able to lead from our stomachs, lead from what feels true. I think the well-being piece feels true. I think we're all globally finding it's harder and harder to keep good people, to keep good skilled people, to attract them and to retain them. If we can have a modern workplace where actually people feel better holistically when they're there, that's a good recruitment strategy. It's a smart retention strategy. So I think there's huge advantage to be thinking there. And I think what COVID has taught all of us globally is we get surprises We get surprised. We get predictable surprises all of the time. In New Zealand, we have earthquakes, major earthquakes, that can be hugely damaging to our society and our community. These are stressful. And what we've found, I think, through major disasters or crises like COVID is that well-being and psychological health is like oxygen. If you have people that have got good well-being, they can respond and they can flex and they can bring themselves to the solution. And so your people become part of your solution. But if they are stressed and worried and depressed, they won't be able to do that. So I went from being afraid of mental health and psychological safety to now being absolutely convinced that lets us have a totally different conversation. It lets us talk to everybody at work in a far, far better way.
Thank you, Francois. And I've moved the slides on because I think, you know, you've mentioned COVID. It's been mentioned a couple of times now. And this really is a critical time for psychological health across the globe. Small business, large business, doesn't matter what sector you're working in, doesn't matter if you're not at work, it doesn't matter if you're at school or in any other stage in your life. Ooh, some background noise. Can you mute yourself if you're not muted, please? Thank you. But we have all been negatively impacted by the last few years. Many different circumstances, bereavement, supporting our families through ill health. A lot of people have what is now known as long COVID, those lingering symptoms of COVID, and haven't fully recovered. But there's the actual, particularly related to work, for a lot of people, the potential or actual burnout of coping for a long time in difficult situations, to the point where it's becoming harder and harder because people are exhausted emotionally, and that impacts physically. And there's lots of anxiety around going back to normal. There's a lot of push across the world right now to go back to normal. But we know that this disease hasn't gone away. There's still risk out there. So although we might be bored with it, actually the disease isn't bored with us yet. And there is understandable anxiety about that going on. So, you know, John, do you think this is going to be something that we can manage easily and quickly? Is it a long-term thing? Is it a short-term thing? What are your views?
Manage easily and quickly. The answer to both those is no. It's interesting. I was looking at this list and I was thinking, this is not a list of new. These are not new struggles. These are just the same struggles in a different form. That and different communities. Like in New Zealand, we have. I think it's certainly internationally recognised, but certainly it's big news here about a very high suicide rate, particularly youth suicide rate. You know, so that's a particular local stressor. It's part of our local context about how about people's health and how they work and the sort of decisions that we make. So, you know, we might replace some of these with different drivers, but you know, struggle's not a new thing. When I was looking at this list, one thing that struck me was around bereavement. So while I've been in New Zealand for 30 odd years, my family's still in England, and during COVID, I lost both my parents and my older brother died, not of COVID, so I attended their 3 funeral services online via Zoom. And I think, well, that must be quite an unusual experience, but I know it's not. There've been millions of people around the world who have probably had very similar experiences. So it's learning to do old things in new ways, and maybe this is part of how we deal with COVID. I remember going to one of the first ISO 45003 webinars after it was released, or around the time that 45003 was released, and listening to one of the presenters say, you know, in a bizarre, ironic way, that COVID gives us opportunities as well. that there were demands. We were being challenged to find new ways of working with, developments of, global technologies and climate change and those sorts of things, that we were going to have to think about new ways of working. I think one of the challenges of COVID is it's said this is not as discretionary as you thought it was going to be, that actually you have to find new ways of working, you have to be flexible, that's the only way you're going to survive here. So it challenges our resilience. It challenges our resilience as individuals and as work groups and as businesses. Resilience not being bouncing back, but resilience being using adversity to spring forward. So I certainly don't want to dismiss the effect of COVID. I don't want to minimize the very significant negative impact this has had on people, but I don't think it's going to pass quickly, and maybe this is not the only pandemic we're ever going to have to deal with in our lifetimes. But I think the challenge is about identifying our strengths, developing strategies for identifying and dealing with local risks, which will be different for different parts in the world and even different parts in our country, and having a focus on the fundamental of worker well-being, and thinking about how do we respond to this in our place, with our workforce, in our market, with our business, and that response will need to be different, and will need to be sort of titrated or delivered differently. I suppose sort of the metaphor I was thinking is that we would be surprised if a business went out and spent $1 million on a brand new machine, didn't invest in the maintenance program to keep that machine running smoothly at all times. In the same way, we would hope that a business wouldn't employ a workforce and then invest nothing in keeping that workforce working to the peak of its ability. And what COVID does is challenge us to think about what that.
Thank you, John. We're having a few audio issues with you, John. You might want to turn your camera off just to help your audio. We'll give that a go for the next little while, if you don't mind. We are getting quite a lot of questions in through the chat. So panelists, on your toes, these are not prepared, and I'm going to ask you some questions you may not be expecting. So I'm going to start first, please, with Barbara. There's a question here asking about presenteeism and leaveism. How does a business calculate these to quantify a benefit? That's quite a specific question, but can you help us with that?
I'll try. As far as I know, none of the small enterprises I have ever helped has calculated presenteeism or leaveism. I only know one of the companies I have worked with. I asked them because they said, I need a management system, and I said, okay, which is more important to you, the safety or the health issues? And he immediately said the health issues, because for me as an employer with only 5, 6, 7 workers, as soon as one drops out, all the others are going crazy and are going into activism and trying to make it up for the one who fell out, who dropped out due to an illness, due to maybe a workplace accident. And he said that's why health issues are more important to him than the safety things, because the safety things are usually you can turn to a technician and say, okay, how can we solve that problem? But the health issues are much more well, they're harder, and you can't really calculate that. In Austria, we have statistics going on how many work days does one worker per year miss out on the workplace. On the average in Austria, it's about 13 days per year. And that varies from sector to sector. From the smaller companies usually have less fallout days. Excuse my English, I'm non-native, so I'm sometimes struggling for finding my words.
You're doing fine, Barbara.
Thank you. When in 2013 the Austrian employers were forced by law to evaluate the psychosocial risks, they in the beginning said, okay, why do we have to look after the mental well-being of our workers? Because I'm not a psychologist, so why should I? But now these days, after not even 10 years, we have many tools, many well-accepted tools who help employers just take care of whatever they have to look for in terms of well-being. But for presenteeism and leavism, I'm afraid I don't know any study that has, well, in Austria at least, that has calculated all that.
Okay, fair enough. I'm going to turn to you briefly, if you don't mind, Ruth. I know that in the UK, there is, from the Health and Safety Executive, there has been talk that presenteeism costs organisations more than absenteeism. So presenteeism being people turning up for work when really they're not able to work efficiently. Is there anything that IOSH can advise on how people can manage that or measure that? And Francois, I know you want to jump in, so I'm going to come to you as well in a moment.
Oh, thank you, Sally. And I'm sitting here frantically thinking of the percentage, but you're right, the presenteeism impact is much higher than sickness absence. And there are different studies out there. So in our IOSH session of managing occupational health and wellbeing, we do talk about presenteeism being part of supporting people to come to work, remain in work and get them back to work safely, making sure we look after their health, safety and well-being. But there are various studies out there. It's much harder to measure presenteeism. It's much easier to measure somebody who's often absent. Because as you just said, Sally, the reason why, I'm sorry, is my audio okay? I can hear a bit of background, it's fine. So the reason why people might be present but not fully present, fully productive, can be for various reasons between, what I might just turn up, there might be different things going on for me compared to others. So it is much harder to measure, but there are statistics out there. And it's important to have a look at what those factors are. So when we talk about lagging and leading indicators, sorry to bring in some of the technical language, but it's useful to have a look at what is making people present to the office when they're not going to be fully engaged. And just picking up on the leavism part as well, obviously there's exit interviews, why are people exiting? So it's just unpacking those reasons as to why people would be present or leaving the organisation, and actually seeing what that organisation can do to culturally shift and, I suppose, create that workplace where people aren't coming when they're poorly, they're not coming if they could still be suffering from bereavement, but they're coming in. So there could be policies or processes in place which are sort of creating that culture. So it is that cultural shift, having the right processes to support people, doing these kind of surveys with employees to find out, how are you feeling today, what's going on, are you fully present? So there's different ways of doing it and different tools that are out there on the market. So there's nothing specifically on presenteeism through IOSH at the moment, but we have got guidance generally on the measures that you can use for measuring performance across health, safety and well-being. So thanks for bringing that my way, Sally. Thank you.
So people can come to IOSH for some guidance if this is a topic that interests them. There is guidance available.
Around the performance measures, yes, it's part of what we're working through at the moment on our Catch the Wave campaign, so having a look at what's out there of measuring that performance, and we're part way through this journey of gathering information and research. So there's information at the moment, but there will be more to come, not just on presenteeism, but just generally on good measures of health, safety and wellbeing performance.
Thanks, Ruth. And actually in the committee, in the technical committee, we're also working on performance evaluation guidance. So, you know, this is a very interesting topic, which I will take to that working group and say, this is something people want to know about. What do you think, people? So I'm going to come to you now, Francois. You had a point you wanted to make. Sorry to keep you waiting.
No, not at all. And I mean, I think that performance monitoring questions is a live one globally. So, you know, I look forward to where IOSH end up, Ruth. You've got a fan down here who's keen to hear. No, all I was going to quickly add, Sally, was I think my observation is when we talk about mental health, there's a really natural swing to the negative harm elements of mental health. But mental health is not the absence of bad, it's also the presence of good. And I think now is a critical time for psychological health, because I think we all now understand it's real. We all now have an applied experience. We all have had a lived experience of how it impacts us in a way that before the pandemic, I don't think we did. So I think that there's I just think at the same time as us needing to be aware of how do we make sure we are proactively managing the things that could be the harm elements, the problem elements around mental health, I think there's a really unique opportunity for us to frame the positive opportunity that COVID's presented. I now know people that I work with who have dogs and who have crying children or have happy children, who have a spare room they can turn into an office, and those that have a kitchen table they need to work on. So the idea of seeing the whole person and the idea of that being real, I think that was a hard sell 3 years ago. I think organizations struggled to understand that was real, and now everybody feels it. So I just think there's a really lovely leadership opportunity there for us to not lose sight of and hold on to as we manage this area.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's really fitting in with all the questions that are coming in at the moment. So I'm sorry we're going way off plan, but I'd like to answer as many of these live questions as we can. So somebody has just put in a question saying the small business they work for has most of its employees working from home. So just to the point that you're making, Francois. So how can a standard ISO 45003, the standard in question here, with such a dispersed workforce, little or no regular daily contact, no common workplace, no common structure, how can 45003 help this? I don't know who wants to jump in. Linda, we haven't heard from you for a while. Would you like to speak to this? Have you any guidance?
Yeah, thank you, Sally. I want to explain about the data from a psychology company who provide a professional psychology services to company in Indonesia. In 2020 to 21, yeah, there is data there. The heavy workload and the work limitation due to working from home, yeah, is a factor that effective to psychological hazard, yeah. So this is as we all know in ISO 45001, there is a clause that require us to conduct hazard identification, yeah, especially for the psychosocial hazard, yeah, in the workplace, yeah. So not limited to the physical health, mental health workers in any sector, yeah, regarding their size, shape, or organization, yeah, they have to face the complex mental health during the pandemics. So one of our the data is one of the factor from the psychological is about the working from home and working from office. Yeah, they get some issue from that. from the World Health Organization, that is concluded that depression, anxiety, have a significant impact, cost to the global economy up to $1 trillion a year, and due to decline productivity. And about the psychological hazard, when someone who is depressed emotionally tends to be more impulsive, so it will be affected to the heart pumping faster, so it will be impact to the nervous system. And the impact from the safety, the pressure from the employee who have the heavy workload, it will become not focused. I think when he driving or have accident when he operating the machine, because they have a workload, so many workload, so the worker can got the accident, So I very agree, and I believe that ISO 45003 can help organization to managing the psychological risk, in accordance with the OH&S management system, to support mental health, and not only focus on work environment, but it can increase the resilience of the organization. And of course, when they have managing the psychological risk, they can improve the performance and the productivity. As you know, not only the heavy workload in the organization, the relationship between our superior, like our boss, and between our co-workers, and then about the work motivation is always from the 2020 and until 2022, it almost become a higher to be a factor that big up the psychological hazard that so many employee in Indonesia when they consulting with our psychologists, and from the 2021, because there are pandemic, there are work limitation due to our working from home, so it will it affected to their performance. Thank you, Sally.
Thank you, Linda. And I just want to remind all our panelists, we only have half an hour left. We have a lot of questions, so so interesting to hear everybody's thoughts, but let's keep them brief now, otherwise we're not going to get close to answering all the questions. Linda just mentioned using 45003 with 45001, the management system standard, and I just think it's worth reminding everybody that you don't need to have implemented ISO 45001 or have a formal management system in place to get benefit from ISO 45003. It is written for everybody, no matter the circumstances, no matter what type of workforce they are, no matter whether you know the subject or not or have expertise in there. It is worth reading because there will be things that will help you regardless of whether your workers are at home or in a physical workplace that is operated by the organisation. Ruth, I know you want to jump in, then I'm going to come to Barbara, but short, please.
You've kind of said what I was going to say, thank you, Sally, that actually as long the standard covers the work, wherever that work is, and it's in a structured way through that sort of the plan, the do, the check act, so making sure you're considering what could cause harm, physically, mentally, so, and it guides you through. So I won't repeat, it just gives you that the clarity and the process to go through. So that's how the standard can help give you that bit of structure through good occupational safety and health management and good risk management practice. I will say no more. All the answers are in the standard. Thanks, Sally.
Brilliant. Thank you, Ruth. Can we go on to the next slide? Thank you. So this actually fits very nicely with one of our live questions that's come in, and we've touched on it a little bit already, that many causes of stress, anxiety, depression are beyond the workplace's control, and traditionally I think workplaces have gone, nothing to do with us, leave your problems at home and just do your job. But I think we have come to a place, and again, hooray for COVID bringing us some benefits for once, you know, where businesses are going, oh yes, you can't leave it at home. We are human beings, we operate in the world, we're at home, we're at work, we're the same person. So if something is going on outside of work, it's still coming into work. If something bad is going on at work, we take it home. So there's a big picture here. And we've also got a question in the chat about the war in Ukraine. Now, this exposes many workers to lots of risks. So the question is, what do we say about risks in war zones? And certainly this is something that was discussed when 45,003 was in development. But also, I think it's worth expanding that, because there's a lot of anxiety about there is a war going on top of the pandemic, on top of financial crises and everything else. This is not just affecting workers in the war zone. It is affecting lots and lots of people. I'm going to come to John first. I'm a little bit concerned now I can't see him that we might forget about it. So John, would you like to say anything about managing these external causes and how we can do something about it?
Yes, I would. I didn't think you'd forget about me. I knew you'd come back to me. I think you're exactly right. And I was thinking about this slide in answering the when people were talking about the last question, as the last couple of questions as well, because there's this distinction between causes and effects. So the truth is that a business may not be able to have an impact on the causes of the of a person's distress or challenges to their well-being, but the impact of those things certainly has can be felt at work, and the business does have an obligation to manage those. So I was at a barbecue maybe 12 months ago, and was talking to a friend of one of my sons who's works on a construction site, and he noticed that the one of his workers was texting while he was walking around with this pneumatic nail gun, and was putting gibboard or nailing pieces of wood together while he was texting. And he went up to him and said, "What the heck are you doing?" And the worker said, "Well, I split up with my girlfriend over the weekend, and I'm just seeing whether we can patch it up." He said, "Well, you're not doing that while you're also carrying around this pneumatic nail gun. First of all, you might put a nail through your own foot. Secondly, even worse than that, you might put a nail through somebody else's foot. And thirdly, even worse than that, you might put a nail through my foot. So can you please put the nail gun down, go away and sort out what it is you need to sort out?" And I think that for me, that was a sort of an absolute microcosm, a focus of how it is that things outside work can have an impact on work, can have an impact not just on the worker, but on the people around them, can pose a risk for other people in the workplace that actually the employer has an obligation to manage. So we do need to think very broadly. So how do we manage this? I think this is about getting to know your workers. This is about building a culture where people can come in and say, "This is what's going on for me," where they can, where colleagues can say, "Seems like things are not going very well for you today. What's going on? Can we help you?" And where we build a culture where this sort of culture of caring is seen as an okay thing to do, that this is part of working together, is actually caring for each other and having a safe environment where that can happen. You make another interesting point, Sally, though, and I'll finish with this, is that what happens at work also goes outside work. So if you're highly stressed or challenged at work, when you punch your ticket at 5 o'clock, you don't leave all that stress at work. You might jump into your car and roar out of the car park, maybe just nearly missing some pedestrians on the pavement or nearly causing a car crash. You might stop for a drink on the way home to sort of settle your nerves, and then you get home and maybe you don't have a good interaction with your partner or your kids. So it works both ways. What happens at work goes home, and what happens outside of work comes to work. And employers will have an interest, if not control, will have an interest in all of that.
I'm having mute unmute problems. I apologise. Thank you, John, for that answer. Does anybody else want to speak to this, to the war in Ukraine? Barbara, hands up, off you go.
Thank you, Sally. Well, I can totally relate with what John just said. In my case, the team I'm leading all over Austria is 150 persons, but the very small team closely working together with me is 5 persons. And out of these, one just dropped out for a 2-week sick leave and she was very open about it, because she said, or she wrote me an email after I wrote to her, oh, I hope you get back soon and be well soon. And she wrote, I have sleeping problems, and I just saw that I cannot do my work properly anymore. So I can totally relate. We need, as employers, as leaders, whatever, we need to create a safe environment where people can come up to us as leaders, or as to their leaders or managers, and say, okay, you know, I really have an issue. Can we please talk about that? We are all persons. We're full human beings. We're not only the work person at work. We also may have an issue with our children going to school or not going to school. So all these impact us at our workplace, and depending on whether the work itself is hazardous or not, we can make bigger or smaller mistakes with the relative impact. So this, and of course, the war in Ukraine, my hometown is Vienna, which is about 750 kilometers from the border to Ukraine. That's about the same distance for going to Milano in Italy. I have never been to Ukraine yet, but to Milano I have been quite a few times already. So I know how long it takes to go there by car. And in Vienna, all the children, there are many refugees right now. We want to integrate these people. So they have to learn the new language. They have to learn how to behave safely in the new work environment. They have to be taken up, and all that causes stress, not only for the persons new to the team in terms of onboarding, but also to the rest of the team, having to or wanting to welcome these people. I think in terms of psychosocial factors, it's very important to build the resilience in teams after COVID and after major impacts such as maybe a war or some riots in our world. Thank you.
Thanks, Barbara. Ruth, I know you want to jump in. Really brief, please.
Yes, I will do. And I think just to bring it to practical terms is when I've been involved with the risk assessments in the workplace, particularly in the UK, and we've talked about managing work-related stress, it's impossible to have that conversation and purely look just at the work-related risk factors. I've always added on an extra factor on there to do with individual factors for all the reasons that have just been mentioned by John and Barbara, and yourself, Sally, that we advocate for that whole person approach, and recognising that the Ruth Wilkinson that comes through the door in the morning at work or logs onto my virtual room here, I've still got everything going on at home as well. And if there are worries through finance that you mentioned, the war, there could be family members there, or just purely the impact of what could this have on the rest of us, it's important that we have those holistic conversations. And just to quickly bring it to 45,003, obviously when we're looking at that whole person approach, it's recognising that as people we might bring pre-existing conditions, health conditions, mental health conditions, but it will also open up looking across the work environment as to what factors we need to consider. And for those SMEs, small, medium enterprises, service sectors, where can we have where can we support, you know, through that whole person approach? Is it something simple of structuring start and finish times? We've got certain policies where we can support with what's going on at home. You know, that there are things that we can do, but unless we have the conversation to get to those root causes, it will limit us. And if we don't have that approach, then of course people go off poorly, or they'll be presenting, you know, that presenteeism we've talked about, it'll have an impact on them and our business. So we definitely need to worry and have this holistic view. Thank you, Sally.
Many thanks, Ruth. I'm going to try and really zip through some of the live questions that are coming through. So on your feet, people, be ready for short answers. It's like a quiz show now. I'm going to start by answering the first question from Botswana about helping companies in Africa to implement ISO 45001 and perhaps by extension ISO 45003. Please be reassured there are many African representatives on the committee. Do get in touch with us and we will help you. We have regional representatives for Africa specifically doing interventions in that place, and Barbara and her colleagues are specifically helping small businesses in Africa as well as everywhere else. Please do get in touch, and the contact details will be on the slide, so you can just email us directly. I'm coming to Francois next. There's a question here saying, I am trying to introduce 45003 in sessions with top leadership. It seems there is a fear of shining a light on stress at work, as we will somehow be inviting workers to claim they're stressed. There is also a fear of the sheer scope of psychosocial risk management and that topic, and the burden this could place on workers who are expected to recognise and prevent this. Any advice, briefly, Francois?
Yeah, okay, thanks, Sally. It's a question I hear all of the time. Whether you look or not, those realities are there. There will be people that are stressed. There will be things that are causing problems. Now, you can take an ignorant view as an executive to say, if I don't ask, it won't happen, and then I can keep my head firmly in the sand. I would say the bigger risk is doing nothing about it, because you'll see people walk out the door anyway. I think the idea of, I think we need to be honest, we need to look in the mirror as executives. We create a culture in our organization that delivers a whole bunch of benefits. So we need some courage. But this is an area where I often talk to executive teams around thinking big but starting small. Have an aspiration to achieve more. Have an aspiration to pick up 45,003. Have an aspiration to create an environment where people can thrive. But start with your executive team. Start with a team that's engaged, that you like. Start with a small group that you can actually do something with. So think big, but start small would be the biggest tip that I bring to executive teams, because it lets you make a beginning without feeling you've got to solve it in one.
That's brilliant. Thank you, Francois. Again, still having mute-unmute problems. Sorry. I want to come to Linda very briefly, please, Linda. There's a question here about when an organisation certifies to 45001, but the leadership is really focusing just on the requirements rather than practical implementation. What can the people responsible for health and safety in that organisation do to convince the decision makers, the top management, that it isn't just about ticking boxes to prove that they have implemented a standard?
Yeah, thank you, Sally. I think we can using worker participation to have a consultation with our leader. Yeah, so we hopefully from the participation from worker, we can ensure that it is the worker have provide feedback from the risk and action taken, yeah, for to manage them, yeah, because the leader only having the management from the regulation, so we have to feedback from the worker. Is it quite enough to our worker? Yeah, about so we have to have feedback to our leadership, and we have to ask our leader to give a role model and to give encourage or support to our workers at all level to participate in decision making. So about the OH&S planning, yeah, OH&S management system planning, not only the responsibility for our leader, the worker participation, the worker representative, I think should have feedback to the leader. So I think when the worker have involved into planning maker, yeah. So I think they can having a OH&S management system that can satisfy the all level of organization. Thank you, Sally.
Thanks, Linda, and it's great that you brought up worker participation, such a crucial thing for health and safety management generally, but perhaps even more so for psychological health and safety. It's about communicating with each other and making decisions collectively, isn't it? If it's going to work, if we're going to build that culture of trust and safety, it's got to involve everybody. Right, we have 10 minutes left. We aren't even halfway through our slides. So quick fire round. Ruth, I've got a slide on the screen at the moment introducing 45,003 for people who don't know it at all. Would you just like to say a few words, encourage people? Why should they look at it?
Absolutely, thanks, Sally. So obviously the use of the standard will acknowledge that this is longer term commitments rather than short term interventions, and it'll help organisations reposition the work environment, the design as that top priority. So we've just heard we need that leadership, we need worker engagement, and if I just quickly look at it, it is easy to use and easy to follow. You can navigate through. It looks at principles, which again, as Sally's mentioned earlier, that you don't need to use it with ISO 45001, but obviously you can, and it will complement it, but you can use it standalone to support. And it's because it does navigate you through the subject matter. It does talk through, very easy to follow, what to look out for, what the negative impacts are. So as you're going through that good risk management, what are there? And it also ends with a selection of controls that you can also put into place, but they are principle based. So you can get an idea that they're universal, and then obviously thinking through your own organisation, how they can be applied to you. And obviously just a key bit again, back to that leadership. If you see leaders talking about psychological safety, role modelling, engaging in the conversation, it will help drive that culture, break down those stigmas, and just demonstrate to employees that the care that organisation has for them as individuals. So thanks, Sally. Quick fire and all that.
Thank you very much, Ruth. So I'm not going to ask anybody to talk to this slide, but I think just to introduce what I do want you to talk about is to give our listeners some idea of the kind of hazards to look out for and the effects they can have, what can they do about it over the next couple of slides. So there are three main areas in 45,003, three main areas of hazards that are detailed in the standard. And these are how work is organised, social factors, and the physical work environment. And as we've discussed, that might be home, it might be a factory, it could be on the street, it could be a war zone. So huge range, but it impacts you psychologically as well as physically, and that's important to remember. Next slide, please. So let's have a look at how work is organised, a really major area in terms of psychosocial risk. Francois, could you say a few words about this, perhaps give some examples and what people can do about it?
Yeah, okay, very, very quickly. Three things I'd say about this. When I look down those, all of those bullet points, none of those are about psychology, they're about work. So if we go back to the leadership conversation earlier, you don't have to be a psychologist to talk about this stuff. You've got to be a work expert. And that's what these things are about. Embrace the work, Make sure, and what the standard gives you is a risk assessment process. Some of these things won't be a problem, some of them will. So you need a good trust risk assessment process to be able to talk with your people about these issues. And so if I think of job control and demands, exposure to situations that cause trauma, a drink manufacturer member of mine went through a psychosocial risk assessment. They provide drinks to retailers directly. And all of a sudden, by asking different questions, they found out the biggest stress to their staff going into these retail was aggressive retailers who were stressed. They've been managing, they thought they were managing a completely different problem. But by asking the question, being curious about the work, they realized what they could start to do is engage with their retailer clients and having different set of expectations, different set of conversations with them. So all of a sudden they could support their people who were struggling with this issue by having a different conversation. Had they not asked first, they would have been fixing completely the wrong problem. So that's just one example, Sally. Sorry, I'll just keep it at that.
No, it's great. And I think one of the things that 45,003 really focuses on is look at those root causes. Don't assume you know what they are. Explore, as you say, listen to people and really explore. But tackle the root causes. Don't tackle the symptoms. We hear a lot about personal resilience. We heard a lot about mindfulness. They're all lovely. But if you've got too much work on your plate and you're working shifts every day and you feel isolated, they're not going to help. So root causes, first of all. But Francois has also brought us on to social factors, because that is very much, you know, related to this. If you've got aggressive people you're working with, it's an issue. If we can go on to slide number 17, please, David. Perhaps, Barbara, you want to say something about social factors? Briefly, 6 minutes.
Okay, thank you. Social factors, of course, very, very important. We're all social beings. We interact every day with either customers or retailers, as Francois just put it. We might have difficult situations as waiters or waitresses in restaurants every day. And then there is always the question, how do we communicate? How do we interact at work with our colleagues, with our boss? Is the information, the flow of information clear enough? Do we understand the same things by the same keywords? And that is key to success and key to health as well. Because if we don't understand what we should be doing and we do it wrong, something might happen. So, and it's all about also about leadership and work-life balance these days. If maybe not only in Austria, but I experience that a lot. Work-life balance, coming back from home office back to the regular office, for some people is really difficult because they have arranged their workplace at home and now have to go back and forth between the workplace and their home space every day again. That also might cause some irritations within the people. And to do that, I would, for a small business, I would just say, okay, take this list and talk with your team. Talk to your team about that. Thank you.
Great, thank you, Barbara. Ruth, can I very quickly get you to talk about work environment, equipment, hazardous tasks? If we can move on to that slide, please, David, slide number 19. Particularly thinking about small businesses, what can they do? What should they think about in terms of how the work environment affects our psychological health and well-being?
Yeah, thanks, Sally. So keeping it short, you'll see, without reading through the slide, the very last one on there mentions if you're working in unstable environments such as conflict zones. We've had the conversation around the war in Ukraine, but of course you can be working anywhere where there could be political unrest. You know, it's important to acknowledge that the work environment that people are working within. We've got the rise of the informal economy, you know, digital platform workers, the Ubers, you know, working in a different way, different rights, all of this can have impact on the individual. And I suppose to put it into a context, we're all aware of the hazardous manual handling tasks, which are known to interact with psychosocial hazards, and they can influence outcomes such as musculoskeletal disorders. So if you look on the list, if you're working in areas that have got poor lighting or lack of space, they can all have an impact on the postures people adopt, how they undertake that work, on the worry that they might have of doing that work. So there is a link between the two. So I suppose at this point, Sally, in the interest of time, is acknowledging that the working environment, the equipment that they use, the hazardous tasks that they're undertaking, there is a link back to the psychosocial factors as well. So again, that good root cause analysis is what we need to do, find out what's going on, and then we'll have a look at some mitigations. Thanks, Sally.
Thanks, Ruth. And I'm so sorry we're having to rush everybody through the end of this webinar. We obviously were enjoying our conversation far too much earlier on. So I'm going to come to each one of you in turn. 30 seconds, please. What one piece of advice would you give to a small organisation or a service sector organisation to improve their psychological health and wellbeing management today? Francois first, please.
Be brave. This demands that we understand that we don't know what the issues are for our people. So we need to accept that, and we need to be vulnerable and ask, and we need to listen, and we need to recognize we will hear things that make us uncomfortable. We will hear things that aren't what we wish they were. So we need to still take action. So in that space, we need to think big, but start small.
Actually, that's so good. I'm tempted to finish it there because we've only got a minute left, but I'm going to go to John just because he's off screen again and again. I don't want you to think you've forgotten.
Thank you. I would say it's to remember that work as imagined can often be different from work as done. And the only way for a business to understand really what risks are faced by the workers is to ask the workers. So worker engagement, participation, representation, absolutely crucial to recognising and managing psychosocial risks in work.
That's brilliant, thank you. And I'm afraid we are completely out of time. David, if we can just go to the Get Involved slide, the next slide, please. There is information in this pack about how to follow our work in the technical committee, how to get in touch with us. So please do keep this conversation going. We want to hear from you. We want to know what's going on. We want to know your questions and what help you need, what we can do better. Very quick thank you to all of our speakers, Francois, Barbara, Linda, Ruth, John. You've all been great. We should have done 3 hours, not an hour and a half. Learning for next time. It's all about continual improvement. Thanks all. Really enjoyed talking with you. Goodbye.